Bonjour.
Good morning, good morning. All the early risers, thank you. Welcome to this session. The title being Rebalancing Power Within Companies. Note that there is no question mark, so we'll get back to this. This morning we do have an amazing panel because Roland Perrault, who is the General Inspector of Finance, who represents the Cercle des Économistes, so Jérémy Delecourt, CEO of Ardian, please, Jérémy Delecourt, CEO of Ardian, Pierre Ferracci, President of the Group Alpha, habitué to the crowd as a football club, Olivier Lenel, President of the Director General of Mazars. Then welcome Geoffroy Roux de Béziers, still President of the MEDEF, still released, and this is last intervention. And of course, Sophie Binet, Secretary General of the French Workers' Union, CGT, who's making her first public appearance in the. It's like a show, you know. Thank you very much anyway. So before giving the floor to Anne Perrault, who has to somewhat set the stage, I would like to tell you that the session is in parallel with 3 sessions, so we have to be the best. The challenge clearly is to have the best session, and it is according to the organizers. We are about 400 in the room, and 4,000 according to the CGT. Good start. I said it when I started. There is no question mark. This is what we could call an editorial choice, which reflects in the composition of the panel. Because on the business side, we've got Ardian, 80% of the employees are shareholders, Mazars, partner office, people who are involved in the capital, and Group Alpha, which is close to the CGT. Well, this is the way you define yourself, okay, Pierre? And then I think it's essential that the average situation of companies in France is not quite like that. So I will ask Geoffroy Roux de Béziers to tell us, in terms of rebalancing, what is the situation of French companies. Geoffroy. Thank you all. Yeah, maybe just to, well, today there are more than 4,000 companies in France. Less than 3 million are so different status. Micro entrepreneurs, though that's little less than 1 million who are small, medium-sized company, between 0 and 400% family business, you know, usually a one-man shot, you know, one-man show, or they make money from their dividends, they pay themselves when they make money. Then after that, they got 170,000 businesses between 10 and 50. This is the core of the reactor in terms of jobs, you know, about 99%. 100% held by one or several families. Then slightly 5,000 ETIs where the capitalistic is different. There could be some are public, some are held owned by private equity or families, and a bit less than 3 major corporations. 300 major corporations who have a scattered capital. Usually they're public, they're administrators, salaries, shareholders. So the issues of governance, which occupy the press and even the AFET-MEDEF, concern a very small part of the system, and the question of the rebalancing is different whether you have 5 employees or if you got 300,000. If your capital is held by only 1% or by thousands of shareholders throughout the world. So this is the last pattern that will be of interest to us today, even though we can well imagine that it will be the wish of some of you. What happens in large corporation is somewhat percolating into the SMEs. Well, we see that in the sharing of value, it started right at the top in the large companies, and then it goes down with various tools. Recently, we signed an agreement with a certain number of social partners to have a mandatory value sharing in the 4910, that is the large segment I mentioned early on. Now, of course, if there is no board of directors, which is the case of most companies, when there are no external shareholders, you know, it's a different discussion. There can be problems within the families, but that's another topic. But we are not rebalancing powers. We are, yeah, okay. Sophie Binet, you have the floor. The title of the session, to rebalance the power, and there is no question mark, as if you had written the title. At least we agree on one thing, that there is unbalance of powers in companies, with an unbalance between employees, shareholders, mainly, which grew last year because of the internationalization of the organization of companies, which can run away from, dodge the fiscal laws and legislation of states, unbalance which increased the financialization of companies, with more and more complex and fluctuating financial organizations, and which turned into a weakening of the role and prerogatives of employees' representatives, especially with the so-called Macron ordinance, the reform of the labor code, which led to the employees' representatives should be in a lesser number, with prerogatives more concentrated and less possibility to recall or call upon experts, and which has weakened the negotiation power, because until now there was a system that we could summarize by saying it's the principle of the hierarchy of standard collective negotiation could only improve standards, and today it is at a variable scale, and today the negotiation scale is selected by the manager of the company, who says if he wants to negotiate at the group affiliate site level, and they could be only, you know, the closer you got to the site, the better it was. But now this is gone. So we had a position which enabled us to be in a more balanced situation than today in the negotiation. This change has weakened significantly our ability to intervene. It is not by chance that today, unlike what we hear, we don't see a price salary loop, but a price profit loop, profits which are maintained, and inflation impacts the consumers, but salaries at best are stable, or actually drop in constant euro, with negotiation power which have been weakened for us in businesses. Thank you. We'll come back on this topic. Well, I'll give the floor to Anne Perrault for the Cercle des Economistes, who has to set the stage. Anne, thank you. I don't know if this microphone is working. Yes? Okay, it will work. So let me try to see the economists see this issue of rebalancing powers. Well, yeah, okay, thank you. So economists see this issue of power balancing within the companies and within its environment in different manners. Initially, of course, there is an issue that's been mentioned in the has been mentioned by the first two speakers. It's a macroeconomic issue, that is redistribution, salary, profits, sharing. And this notion of redistribution and repartition is based on macroeconomic aspects, such as the labor market situation, the negotiation power. This is something that depends a lot on the way the company fits within its market, or in its own market. And and on the labor market, and this will define clearly the negotiating power within the company. So we could say that in a way, the macroeconomic constraints acts on the way the microeconomics, this sharing will be negotiated. And the current situation, negotiation we mentioned on participation, the employee shareholding and so on and so forth. Well, this is all concern the participation. But economists do not limit themselves to this approach, but they see companies as sites where economic agents with different purposes are acting. So the business, the company is a site where incentive conflicts have to be solved. The shareholders don't have the same objectives as the managers. Managers don't have the same objectives as the employees. And progressively will come the question to know how to align the incentives through tools, instruments, incentives, bonuses, redefining of the contracts within the company as a means to solve the incentives conflicts or the motivation conflicts. You cannot move an economic agent such as the company if within that company agents have different roles or visions. We see the problems of distribution we saw initially, but envisage in another perspective, not of social fairness, but of efficacy in the operation of the company. How can you make sure that the alignment of incentives or measures will allow the company to move forward efficiently? And this is a key question, because without efficiency, no value to be shared, and therefore no salary profit sharing. In everything I've said, of course, the company has one objective, which is quite clear, the maximization of profit. Again, this is still the case if we go one step further and we consider that the company is not isolated, but as suppliers and clients. Well, there is a new range of problematics of balancing powers, the competition law, identifying the market power as a power that has to be regulated. The market power is a power, and therefore there are other public policy instruments which are intended to regulate the way a company will function and use the power market whenever it exists in its own market, because to this power they need the counter power, and this counter powers could be the competition of competition. So even if we look at the right to bankruptcy or right to bankruptcy, usually it's a bit late to think about the decision in the company, because you need to define orders of priority among shareholders, loaners, financiers, employees. But this right of bankruptcy has an impact on everything. That goes on within the company. Decisions made within the company depend on the way, should there be a bankruptcy, how the various stakeholders of the company will be paid or compensated for. And the priority given to shareholders over the financials. So, but sometimes companies cannot finance themselves. This is the law of bankruptcy that says that. That stipulates that. Now, more recently, other questions came in which we say, well, the company is not just an economic agent which will maximize profit. It is a member of society. It is a member of society, and as such, it should have an objective which is not just profit, but which resembles a sort of a social contribution. This is, they could include CSR, where we tell the company, careful, it's not just profit maximization, but optimization. You need to be more inclusive, greener, and you have to pay attention to well-being at work and to have prevention for psychosocial risk. You have to protect the private life of your employees in a digital environment, and so on and so forth. So eventually we assign to the company objectives, which means that it shifts from its, sort of deviates from its profit objective, initial profit objective, and then in the company, if it is when it comes to balancing power, the company as a group of individuals, it is the company alone, the company in its market, in its suppliers, clients, and there are different pieces of law that that will be recently the company as a citizen. And we have to ponder the complexity of in which this the last definition puts the company. Is it normal for the company to be an agent of public policy? Because this is what it is asked for from it. So I don't know if you want to discuss that, but I think it is important. Thank you very much for this very precise setting. Sophie Minet, you did explain what the Macron decrees changed. Now, if you were to define what is your ideal system for the sharing of authority? 5 minutes, 5 minutes. No, several leverages are possible. Well, we now salaried employees in the salaried indicators in the management of companies. So it's not all the companies, only 2/3 of companies of SBF 2020 who have employed administrators. And we got about 1/4 of salaried administrators who are the two isolated. And finally, we are not in the strategic decision-making side because no obligation for the salaried administrator should be in the audit committee or administration committee. So this is where criteria are defined for the manager, and this is what will define the strategic choices of the company. So we need to, our proposal is to have 50% salaried administrators, 50%. And 1/3 for public companies with 1/3 of salaried, 1/3 of the users for the public mission. And then we need to have real rights of strategic intervention for the employees on the strategic orientation. I could give you several examples which show the dead end where we are. Why do we talk about the unbalancing? Because shareholders have more power, but always take less risk. We can see that in some situations, of bankruptcy failures. Companies pay the Vivart company. Vivartech, well, it's a conglomerate with a lot of brands, well-known brands, Kukai, Minelli, but this company turned badly not because of its business model, because it was resold several times through debt with LBO systems, and therefore, which completely, they pushed for value, excessive value, and salaries do not have strategic power on that. In the industry, Saint-Gobain, which is, a leader in glass industry in France, which was one of our pioneer industry dating back to the 17th century, decided a few years ago to sell Veralia, one of its affiliates, sold to an investment fund called Apollo. They sold it 3 billion. Apollo bought it with 1 billion direct fund. The rest were debts, and 3 years later, Apollo resold Veralia, having shut down several sites, a production site, and 120, 30 employees in France, and the result is that we end up with a production loss just before the boom of the demand for packaging glass, and the representative from the employees could not stop this destruction of a beautiful company. So we want to have rights of intervention on the strategic orientation. There should be obligation of conformity, for example, for some strategic choices for the employees representative. There could be substantive rights for projects that will jeopardize the social and environmental situation. And finally, a right that would be very efficient, conformity opinion on public support, because all those companies, enjoy, often to say, and in French capitalism, is that it is a capitalism which is highly subsidized, because every year France spends 200 billion euros of public support to companies, tax exemption and fiscal exemption, which are not conditioned that the members of parliament can't even quantify, not even the court of auditors. And we have a simple proposal. It's to have an obligation of conformity agreement from the employees that will, for public support, you know, the Crédit Impôt Recherche, you know, this is the, France is the EOCD country which has the highest level of credits for research, but many reports are there to show that this is poorly used, system is poorly used, not targeted. 1/3 of the Crédit Impôt Recherche research tax credits you know, benefit to the 28th largest company in France. Thank you when you say the salaried administrators should be associated with strategic choices. Should they choose the CEO, they should be able to give their opinion. Of course, if the the employees will choose the CEO alone, no, it will be a scope. But we need intervention leverage. And you know, the payment, the salaries of the CEOs, well, that's a topic altogether. You know, we got the CEO salaries is completely disconnected from the medium, long-term situation of companies. We could multiply the examples when you do, if you do the commission, there is, but the CEO salary criteria. This is which means that, you know, the CEO will comply with the shareholders in what was presented earlier. It is short-term versus medium, long-term. Those who are first interested in the medium, long-term are the employees, because we fight for our jobs. The shareholders are less and less concerned by medium, long-term with shareholding that depends on the Jean-François Bézieux. It depends on the time. Most of the companies are family businesses. You know, most of the time, you know, they're very attached to the shareholding and to the companies, which not what is you said. But there are some shareholding structures which have evolved with and we can see it in many companies. You don't need funds to be majority to have a paying strategy in business. Now, the employees administrators, as they exist already in some companies, what I hear a lot from the managers is that often those administrators will abstain in the votes. Often they abstain from voting when strategic decisions are committing decisions that they, I don't think so. But what is true is that there was a report from France Stratégie or the Treasury on the report of the employees, administrators, and are too isolated because often they're alone in their jobs and often they don't have the means to be in touch with the employees and to have to and fro's with discussion with the employees. Training is too limited and the means of intervention are too limited. That's why I said as a side seat, Jean-François Bézieux, we won't do a live negotiation, but simply vis-à-vis what's, for having listened to Sophie Binet, based on your experience, how do you react? Well, I'll start with my point of agreement with Sophie Binet, and I don't want to place her in a difficult situation. Basically, what we would like as entrepreneurs would be a patient investment capital and to be in agreement with the penultimate talk. Several drifts that took place, Viverté is a great example thereof, is the lack of long-term capital. If you got a real long-term horizon of capital, well, the better for the company. François Michelin, when a company is like a stool, but it has 3 feet, the shareholders, clients, and the employees. Well, he forgot at the time the stakeholders, which come today. But so maybe it's a 4-leg stool. But if we unbalance one way or another to the profit or one or the other of the system, it will fall. So Now, for specific cases, and I will let Jérémy echo, some private equity funds, I would say, have pulled too much on capital to maximize their short-term profits. It will unbalance companies. It so also applies in some stock exchange situation where shareholders sometimes stay a millisecond, extreme case, in the day trading. And this, we as managers, entrepreneurs, and not managers, we don't like that. We don't want that. We don't want this impatient capital. We want duration to deliver and to have a long-term strategy. And it is even more true when we see the climate challenges today. We will not be able to solve the company change in a few weeks. Now, where I do not agree with Sophie Binet is that at the end, someone has to make a decision, and there is a right of vetoes one way or another in the company on some decisions. Well, it's another model. It does exist. It does exist. It is called the SCOP. But then today, this model does exist, but which is less competitive, which doesn't grow so much in a Darwinian market economy, which is ours. Last element, and I'm saying it again, all these discussions, you use the word managers, but managers is a very small part of business, of company government. A business manager today is a patrimonial manager, a heritage manager, and usually has inherited or has created his own company, who's taking the company, but often a lot of difficulties to convince young people to take over because, they saw their parents sometimes, their parents, killing themselves to work. There is an issue of transmission, but and 30, 40 employees around him or her, and like in any, there are also patrimonial managers who are poor bosses, but usually they look for the next generation, and they're not in short terms as described. They're not, by your concern, by the problems of salaries, as mentioned.
So we were talking about the Milton Friedman time with corporate social responsibility and increasing profit. Is that finished? Yes, it's behind us. There are still people who are Friedmanian people. Perhaps even some of these people are in the room. But this idea of saying that only profit is the criterion for success, well, it's not even economic theory. It's pragmatism. If a company does not take on board the stakeholders, the planet, it will come across lots of difficulties, and it will no longer be able to recruit. The generation of people going into companies today want to hear about the situation of companies. So if the company can't recruit, it will die. It will lose its customers. It will lose its financing. So if you don't have a clear strategy for CSR, you lose everything. So whether it's by conviction or necessity, or sometimes both, because, people who run companies are also mothers and fathers. They think about the planet. That's behind us. As MEDEF, we have to act on the laws for public mission companies, focusing on responsible things. I think it's yesterday's debate. Jérémy Delcourt, you are the CEO of Ardian. Let us hear about what Ardian is and maybe give us some figures for that. Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to explain to you just in a few words what Ardian is. Ardian is a company, a management company, a French management company that is the shareholder of 250 companies in Europe, in North America, and in Asia, and it employs 300,000 people. Our job is really to invest in companies. The money that is given to us by insurance companies, pension funds in America, insurance companies in Europe, funds in Asia, and to invest in companies to help them to develop. What I'd like to say with respect to the discussion that's going on is that on the listed market, capital goes back into companies. For family companies, you talked about Michelin, for example, we can keep it for several thousand years. We're looking at 5 to 7 years, which is actually quite long. you described, Sophie Binet, cases of companies with difficulties. I've been in this job for 25 years. We're shareholders of 250 companies. We help to develop employment in France, in Europe, and elsewhere faster than economic growth. And that's very important. In 25 years, I've been through different redundancy schemes, but our job is really to develop companies. Our conviction at Ardian is to invest in a company because the governance of the company is good, and good corporate governance for us, this involves taking part, the employees taking part in management decisions. This helps to associate the employees with the strategic alignment. It makes for financial and extra-financial success in companies. There are environmental challenges. There's the challenge of digital transformation. And we consider that it's good to share power, but it's also good to share the responsibility of these financial and extra-financial successes. And the other side of that is it's the sharing of value. I was saying when I introduced you earlier on that Ardian, 80% of employees are shareholders. Is that right? Yes, indeed. This is not just what we do in Ardian, but in other companies. The rules that we apply to ourselves, well, 80% of employees are shareholders. They hold 50% of our company. And we have 3 staff representatives out of 10 members of the Supervisory Council. What we're trying to do as well is to apply these methods to the companies that we acquire as part of our portfolio by developing the representation of the employees within the management teams and also by developing the sharing of employee value. 15 years ago, we launched a principle that consisted in sharing the capital gains with the employees of the company. And sometimes we paid them up to 6 months of salary. And that's why very often in the case of a buyout operation where the opinion of the trade unions has been asked for beforehand, we've had the support of the unions and often the support of the CGT union, which supports Ardian. So you've financialized the employees, basically. No, we haven't financialized the employees, no. I think it's important to financially educate them. These operations where we're sharing value, they were taken over by a charter for the Private Equity Association that invited all of its members to do the same thing. And this is a good thing. We can be happy about this movement based on sharing. In France, we're lucky because for 50 years we've got simple, efficient tools for sharing value that allow us to make sure that employees are in line with the company's projects. We've got free shares, but this is difficult in certain family companies to have this kind of thing. We now have a new law that allows us to efficiently share value with employees. And of course, there are incentive schemes and profit-sharing schemes. Incentive schemes are important to encourage companies to share profits and set objectives for the financial success of the company. And of course, incentive schemes are important because they make it possible to set extra financial objectives, focusing on digital transformation or environmental objectives for the company, but also objectives for inclusion and diversity. Recently, with the events that we saw in the suburbs, we know that we need companies to play a role in this integration race. This is something that's very important for me. At Ardian, it's very important, and in our company, it's very important. These tools allow us to make sure that employees are in line with the strategic objectives of the company, so that they understand what we're trying to do or where we're trying to go. So I think that we are a private equity fund, but We need to convince the directors of companies and employees that's our job. There are three letters. You've got environment. Environment, it's very important, the environment. But if carbon is important, the S is important, the social aspect is important, because it allows employees, the men and women making up companies, to prepare their pension by sharing values, by confronting with this, this environment. That's very important today. So concretely, do you get interested in a company and do you invest in the company? And this company might not have any value sharing with its employees? Is that a sine qua non condition? Or once you've bought a company and you're in control, you make sure that the company converts? It's not a sine qua non condition when we invest in the company. But we commit to, over the coming year, after coming into the company, we commit to setting up a system for sharing the value on an annual basis. So it might be free shares. It might be, at the end of the day, a share of capital gains with the employees. It's about profit sharing and incentive. And that's why we were very happy to see the widening of the law's coverage. It meant that we could set up things more easily. The bosses of companies could set up things more easily. So it's a very committed policy, a very engaged policy. Sophie Binet, is that a dream, this kind of scenario? Well, for us, I have a very simple question to ask. When we talk about value sharing, why do we never talk about wages? I'm not hearing about wages. And the problem that we have when it comes to sharing value and financializing the economy is the fact that wages are always lower in terms of the wealth created. We've lost 5 points between what was distributed in the 80s and what's being distributed today, and that's what we're saying. So last year, among the 100 biggest companies, 70% of their profit was absorbed by dividends and the buyback of shares, when we're in an unparalleled inflation context where we should be increasing wages and investing in the future and lowering prices to meet the needs of consumers. So we're seeing the price-profit loop that I was talking about. So value sharing, okay, but we need to talk about wages. It's not a taboo word. It shouldn't be a taboo word in the public debate. Okay, so it's not the ideal scenario for Sophie Binet. So you are the president of Mazars, which is a company with a different kind of capitalism. So you're at the head of the company, is that right? Yes, thank you, Nicolas. Can you hear me? Hello, everybody. So Mazars, we're a private equity company. We provide advice. We started with a great idea, a visionary founder after the war. It was founded in Rouen. It's become a French success story in an industry that's very much Anglo-Saxon, as you know. Today, it is based on 30,000 people in 100 countries, and I'm in charge of managing France. So it's the first company in the group. It's 4,000 employees, and I tend to say that Mazars is a company with a double assignment, a double vocation. The first, because we want to perpetuate the founding action of our founder, Mr. Robert Mazars, who in the 70s and 80s, when he gave his consulting company down to his employees who had worked with him, who had been his associates. The second vocation is serving general interests. So we accelerate durability, and we're lucky enough to have talent from the best schools in France, the best universities. We ask them to improve the employability of the company, and they end up taking on roles, major roles in our French companies. and in foreign companies. So coming back to the subject of balancing power in companies, it's one of our concerns. It's a daily concern, but to exercise that responsibility, that vocation that focuses on general interest, we need time, we need a lot of time, we need independence, and, you know, it's a very specific kind of company. I'm aware of that. So this is what we do to make sure that we have a balance. We have 200 associates who temporarily hold the capital of Mazars. They commit to passing it on for nothing, free. And let me tell you what we do with our teams. Our associates of the future are our employees today. So this gives us a certain number of obligations. So we've got some ideas that we share. They can apply to other types of industry. And that is, first of all, we make sure that we've got a real associative democracy at world level. We've got 1,000 associates across the world. There's a lot of voting at Mazars. We vote about important decisions, and we vote. We have a cooperative approach. So it's one man, one woman, one vote. That's the principle. We've also decided to limit the remuneration of our associates. So in a given country, our associates see their remuneration framed in a ratio of 1 to 3. Now, that might seem a lot, but in the economic world, in industry, so it's between associates, not between associates and employees, no, between associates. And the third point, we have a world solidarity model that works well, that allows us to get through difficult periods. And when a country is not doing too well, it's the other countries that come along and balance things out. So they help the teams and the associates of the company in that country. So with our 4,000 Mazarians, we provide support. So we've got a lot of talent, a lot of rare resources. Our companies have been working hard since COVID because we've got a lot of talent and they're highly qualified. We're lucky to work in this way. There's a lot of dialogue. It's very healthy, it's very direct. On a day-to-day basis, our associates are with our customers, they're working alongside our employees. The youngest are helped and supported. And again, they are highly qualified. So they challenge us as well. They question us to find out where we're going. The second initiative that I'd like to share, it's all about listening. It's all about listening to fashion the power in the company. It's important to listen. So we've got a questionnaire, a survey system. 3 times a year, we check the pulse of the company to make sure that it's healthy, and we share the results in a very transparent manner. And what about the third point? The third point, let me talk about 2 initiatives that we took at the beginning of the year, because we're in very demanding professions. We have to, it's important to recognize that. We created 2 breathing periods to allow our employees to disconnect, not just during holidays. We created the Mazars break. It's a sabbatical holiday that can cover up to 3 months. And the second initiative, which contributes to gender equality, is the idea of having a quality-based partnership. We're at a figure of 30%, and we've aligned paternity leave with maternity leave post-birth. So thank you. So those are just some examples. Thank you, Olivier Lenel. I'm going to hand over to Pierre Ferracci. You're the CEO of Group Alpha. You're also the president of the Paris Football Club, the football universe, which is a great place for sharing wealth, I imagine. Yes, it's even more unequal than it is in companies. Are you comfortable in that world? Yes, you must be, because you love football. But you've been defending for a long time something that draws inspiration from the Scandinavian countries. 1/3 of the employees or representatives of unions are part of the boards. Yes, I'm going to talk about the Group Alpha, because we're going to be seen as original in a while. Outside of the capital that is held by those who work, we provide 25% of the capital to a foundation of shareholders that's very much developed in northern countries, in Germany and elsewhere, but not very much in France. I'd like to come back over to what's happening in other countries. We often compare, what's happening in Europe when, it's the right thing to do. We got ahead thanks to General de Gaulle and the resistance. We involved the members of Works Council in boards. And in France, we're behind. There are 13 companies in Europe. We might make the 14th company, where 1/3 of the board members represent the employees. There's Germany and all the Scandinavian countries, but there are also a lot of Central European countries involved in this kind of scheme. So it's about co-determination. It's about having a presence in supervisory councils. There's a separation between the board of directors and the supervisory council. And the advantage there is that you're not managing the day-to-day management of a company, even if in Germany, Works Council have more power than in France. Sophie Binet said this about Works Councils. Works Councils have been damaged by the decrees of 2017, and we can talk about that. But in the supervisory councils, there are 13 countries that are doing better than us. And why have we fallen behind? Well, we can look at the Dominique Semner and Nicolas Nota's report that has been timidly taken up in the Pact law. So I'm quite skeptical about mission public benefit companies, because they can bring employees around strategic objectives, yes, but why are we reaching this stalemate? So why is it difficult to kick things off and get more employees involved in supervisory councils? Well, there's a kind of a trilogy. And if we look at the unions, we can see this. We heard Sophie saying 50% of the board members being employees. 2 unions were not very hot about this, and there were many employers' organizations that didn't like this idea. If we look at countries like Germany and Scandinavian countries, and even some countries in Central Europe, we don't have the impression that the economic dynamic is halted by the representatives of employees or unions in management bodies. I think it's the opposite, and there's quite a lot of research that shows that the economic performance is better when the power is shared. And for obvious reasons, when you assemble a company or a country, each person has the certainty that they're taking part in the decisions. So why do we decry this? There are perhaps cultural problems, political problems, but let me remind you, in these countries, in Germany and in the Nordic countries, whatever the political color, whether we're talking about social democrats or whatever, social democracy is much stronger than France. This doesn't solve all problems. There are conflicts. People express diverging opinions. There's not a complete consensus. The staff reflect the image of company. It's not always in line with what the shareholders want. But what I'm saying is that today we have a challenge when it comes to work. We've got to reindustrialize. We've got to make sure we go through the environmental transition. This is going to be costly. We know this. The report shows this, the report that I mentioned. So I don't know how we're going to finance this, maybe by bringing up the taxes, but that's another subject. All of these challenges deserve that there be a social, environmental, economic impact, just like after the war. So it was the CGT and the CFDT that was in charge, but the economic strength, the economic forces, it's better to, we need to share power in companies. I'm convinced that there won't be no lasting value sharing to ensure the competitiveness of companies and the safety of employees if there's no sharing of governance. We've got to share governance as well as share value. And we've got to do this in a lasting manner. The do go hand in hand. And there was an agreement signed, and it's taking us down the right path, but it is fairly modest in its objectives. The agreement, you're saying, Geoffroy, he's doing very well. He's certainly doing very well today. But I think the agreement in terms of value sharing is fairly modest, even if it's taking us down the right path. So we've got to share power. Once again, half of the countries have adopted that line of action, and France is behind. I have two questions for you. The one is traditional. Many people say that when you talk about these countries, these European countries, and you talk about the unions who play a different role, many people say, yes, but French unions and the political positioning and the stance of unions in France are preventing us from moving in that direction. Yes, we're hearing about radical unions. It's a joke because it's a vision that's based on imagination. It's based on what's happening in, sometimes there are conflicts. There are differences of opinion expressed in supervisory councils that are bigger than we imagine. We've got to stop with all this. Sometimes there are conflicts with shareholders. There was one focusing on two strong economic powers of French capitalism that we heard about in the press. Violent, they're very violent, just as violent as what you hear. So that's a false argument then, yes. The second question then, in these 13 countries, you cited the example, we can say that the companies are working better than in France? Yes. Yes, well, there are studies that show that economic performance is not getting weaker. We've got a big democratic problem in all of our companies. Why do you want companies where we are creating wealth, where the state plays a regulatory role, the sharing of power, where the sharing of power is not being talked about? I don't have an apocalyptic vision of what's happening in companies. I regret that the decrees of 2017 weaken the social aspect. It's not just the 5 unions saying this. Marcel Grignan, Jean-François Pillard, in the assessment committee asked by the Prime Minister at the time, they have a very reserved judgment, if not a negative judgment, about what was done with these decrees. This didn't help the social dialogue. And when you don't help the social dialogue, you're not helping collective negotiations in companies. Thank you very much. Geoffrey Bézieux, and then I'll hand over to Anne Perrault, as is the tradition, to conclude. Let me go back to what Pierre was saying. Employers, when it comes to these subjects, and we're talking about 40 or 20 or however many companies, they realize that it's not these. So employees don't work in these companies. Most employees don't work in these companies. So employers are not very comfortable with these ideas. So Mischbestimmung has been badly translated in France. It's about vetoing, and some employees don't like this idea. I think the freedom, if we don't, no, let me go through to the end of my reasoning. Sometimes we have individuals, men or women, who have a very different vision, a very different political vision of the situation. And in the last social agenda, when I looked at the union paths and talked about training people on the financial objectives, this is an essential part of the game. Yes, it's important to highlight what unions do, but it's also important to look at prerogatives, and it's also important to revise decrees about labor laws, because today we've got to the end of a cycle. Second thing, with respect to diversity of the economic fabric between small companies and big companies, today it's the customers who have the power. And so obviously there's a majority of small to medium companies, but it's the customers who pick up the power. They have the power to apply their management norms. I think we have to say the truth. The financialization of economy is based on account. It's not reality. If we want to put an end to it, we can. I don't think it's just about, proximity, as Geoffrey is saying. If we want to put an end to this, we have to have regulation. That is the standard. We need more laws at national level, at international level, to impose the same thing on everybody. For example, coming back to financialization of company funds, we know what happens with trading and its negative effects. Keeping a share just for 28 seconds. We can regulate that by a law. If we don't have any laws, things will just be about social washing. So keep the microphone. I have the impression that you're not taking part. You haven't made a decision to take part in the negotiations that are going to happen in October. Is that not contradictory with everything that you're saying about the necessity for unions to take part before taking part in the powers of companies? Yes, obviously. But when you're not in agreement, you're allowed to say it. The CGT is not a signatory of the social agenda because employers, for the moment, are refusing to negotiate unemployment benefits. No. I'm just answering your question. No, but what about participating in the... I didn't say that we wouldn't participate in the negotiation. There's a negotiation about complementary pensions, and the CGT will be participating. Anne Perrault, would you like to conclude now, please? Just a few words. I think we've really got to the end of the roundtable. What's really interesting is that at the end of the day, the whole debate has focused on company governance. We've not really talked about how much goes to whoever. And we've talked about the way governance in companies had to better take into account the actions of different stakeholders in the company. I think it's very interesting. I also think what Sophie said was very interesting. At the end of the day, when we say that small companies are in the hands of the major customers, we're talking about something else. We're talking about the market power of companies and the structuring that market power gives them and all of their subsidiaries. It's all about balancing powers. It's not that easy. It's not as easy as we said. Thank you very much. We can give them a big round of applause.